Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to another video. In today's video, we are going to talk a little bit about cultural forms. Now, what do you know about cultural forms, separate and apart from what I'm going to tell you? Before you go any further in this video, just drop something in the comments just to tell me what you know about cultural forms. When we think about cultural forms, we are thinking about some of the specific practices that are associated with a particular community or a group of people within the Caribbean. Now, usually these practices includes various types of rituals, festivals, dance, and various types of music, because most of the cultural forms within the Caribbean, the central elements that remain in all of them, or that's common through them all, you'll see the music and the dance. So, for example, in Jamaica, we have specific ritual practices that are associated with death. For example, hosting a nine-night celebration. Now, within our nine-night celebration, we have strong element of singing and dancing. And of course, food plays a major element, but we are not going to get into that as yet. But I'm sure in other parts of the Caribbean as well, they also have the rituals that are associated with death. Yes, they will also have their own nine-night celebration. Some of them may have things that are similar to our rituals within Jamaica, but they may also differ. But it's the things that we do in Jamaica that are associated with Jamaica, unique to us within Jamaica, that makes it a cultural practice within Jamaica. And so the cultural form of wake, the way it is practiced in Jamaica, may not necessarily be the way it is practiced somewhere else. There are other things associated with cultural forms, including language, various types of paraphernalia, etc. But when we get to the specific cultural forms, we'll look a little bit more at some of those elements. So why should we study these different traditional cultural forms? So sometimes you might stand here thinking, oh, that a long time something that have nothing to do with me, you don't want to do it, etc. But why should we? So let us look at some of the reasons. Now, the first one is that it helps with maintaining one's identity. And so because there are things that are unique in the cultural form, that's unique to a group of people, when you study the cultural form and that you practice within your community, among your group, it helps you to understand who you are. And when you understand who you are, even though you indulge in other practices and embrace other culture, but you have a great appreciation for your own culture, and then you are grounded in who you are as an individual. Another reason why it's best to study, or it's good to study cultural forms, is about the preservation of one's culture. Now, a number of these practices would have been passed on to us. These traditional cultural forms would have been passed on to us from our own ancestors. And so it tells us so much about us. But because the world is also very open and we are introduced to cultures from other parts of the world, if we don't understand our own culture and how important it is to us, then we will start suffering from cultural erosion and somebody else's culture will start taking over. And so when we study our own cultural form and understand its importance and its purpose and its origins, then of course it gives us an opportunity to preserve our own culture while at the same time enjoying a bit and piece of culture from somewhere else in the world. A third reason why it is that we should study cultural forms is that it tells the story of our people. Yes, it captures a great deal of our history. A number of our cultural forms were born out of survival and resistance. When the enslaved were brought to the Caribbean, they needed to survive. They needed to find ways to resist the slave masters and the harsh conditions. And that's how a number of these cultural forms, in terms of what they represent and how they were practiced, were born. And so if we study them, then we'll get a chance to understand the stories of the people who came to the Caribbean and had to live under harsh circumstances, and how it is that they were able to survive. The fourth reason why we should also study cultural form is that it makes an individual culturally aware. Yes, it makes an individual culturally aware. So what it simply means, you're very sensitive to the things that are very close to who you are as an individual. You're very sensitive to the things that makes you who you are, makes your community who it is. You're sensitive to the way of life, generally, of the people within your community or the group that you are a part of. And that is the reason why people from their individual countries will always try to think that their country is always the best. Because of what? Because of the cultural practices that you have within your particular country that makes you who you are. And so people always say, oh, Jamaicans will always say they are the best. Trinis will always say they are the best. The Grenadians will always say they are the best. And it is because those are the things that helps to also develop that kind of patriotism. But when you also study the Caribbean cultural forms, you learn about the other Caribbean countries, so you know how you are different from them in terms of the various practices and also what it is that it's similar. Another reason is that it helps us to make sense of current happenings within our society. Now, when we look at cultural forms, these traditional cultural forms are rooted in history. But when you look at modern and some of our pop culture, some things are not very far removed from the cultural forms. You'll realize that there are similarities and you understand the evolution and why some things are happening the way they are happening. So for example, within the Caribbean, and this is not a Jamaican thing, so I'm not even going to say Jamaica, but within the Caribbean, there's a culture for the people to always do what? People within the Caribbean are always partying. People are always singing and dancing. Entertainment is a major part of our culture today. That is not something that was born the other day. If you look at all the traditional cultural forms, they have strong element of singing and dancing that drive those cultural practices. And it is that particular element that has been passed on to us. And so we develop and continue to evolve as a group of people who are grounded in music, grounded in dancing, grounded in just general party and entertainment and enjoying ourselves. We are able to use our entertainment to relieve stress and just to enjoy ourselves regardless of whatever it is that is happening within our lives. And that was the way of life of our ancestors when they were on the plantations. These practices and the singing and the dancing helped them to strategize and resist the harsh conditions under which they were existing on those plantations. Another reason why we should look at cultural form is that it helps us to understand the people around us. So while we are all from the Caribbean, yes, we all have this history of being colonized and existed under hard circumstances. What you'll find is that the practices in each Caribbean island differ. So while there may be similarities, they differ. And in order for us to understand how some of these practices came about is that we have to study the cultural forms. When we study the cultural forms, we understand their origin, we understand their purpose, we understand why they were practiced the way they were practiced. And if we understand those things, then we can understand the people who live in those spaces. Because remember, each island was colonized differently. And because those islands were colonized differently, you are going to find that there are differences. But in order for us to understand our fellow Caribbean people, it's best for us to study these cultural forms so we can understand why they are the way they are. So for example, if you look at Haiti, people will look at Haiti now and say that they're always revolting, they're always fighting, etc. But if you look at the history of Haiti, yes, and how they were colonized and how they came to freedom, yes, we will understand why it is that they are not afraid of revolution. Yes, because it is within their DNA, that is who they are as a people. yeah, and how they practice some of the things that they actually practice. One other reason that we should also study cultural form is for us to develop an appreciation for the spaces within the Caribbean. Yes, so you don't necessarily have to like, so to speak, or love, because it's not about liking and loving, but it's about appreciating what goes into the preservation of these particular forms. It's about what goes into maintaining one's identity. It's about what goes into being a community, being living as one, and a certain kind of way of life of a people. You learn to appreciate that. So when you look at the people of Grenada and they are preparing for their jab mass, and you see them blackening the body, putting on the horns, etc., from afar, looking at it and not knowing anything about it, then you are prone to make a particular judgment about who they are. So you see horns, you see black bodies, you see red thing running out of mouth. You do not understand the historical significance. You don't understand what they're celebrating. You don't understand how and why they're doing it. We start making these judgments. However, if we study the form, so we can have an understanding of what it is that they are doing and why they're doing it, then we can better appreciate their efforts, yes, in making sure that they are preserving and practicing something that is close to them. You don't necessarily have to be a part of the practice, but it allows you to understand them and better appreciate the perspective and the position from which they come in their practice. So let us look at some cultural forms and the territories, and I'm just going to list out some of them. Yes, we have a way more than what it is that I have here in this video. Yes, so let us look. First, Bele. Bele is found what? Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, Grenada, and Dominica. Wake, the same thing we call 9-night dead yard setup within Jamaica. That practice is found in the various territories within the Caribbean, and I'll talk some more about wake in another video, but not this one. We'll get into the details elsewhere. Kumina. Kumina is found in Jamaica. Stick fighting from the twin island of Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados. Brookings Party, Jamaica. Etu, Jamaica. Jose, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana. The Flower Festival, it's found in St. Lucia and Guyana. Landship, it is practiced in Barbados. And storytelling, which is the Anansi story, that's practiced in various territories across the Caribbean. Now, I want you at this moment to take an action. You're going to put in the comment section a cultural form that is practiced in your territory that I have not placed in this video. Yeah, that's not on my list. Just take a moment and put it in the comment section where you're from and a cultural form that is practiced within your territory. So let us look a little bit at what influenced the Caribbean cultural forms and the retentions that we have. Now, a major influence on the Caribbean cultural forms that we have is colonization. And let me explain a bit further. Now, because the slaves were brought here to the Caribbean, they lived and practiced a particular way. Now, they were all from different tribes. So when they all landed in this world here within the Caribbean, not knowing each other, not speaking the same tongue, etc., they had to find ways to survive. They had to find ways to preserve their own culture. And so as they start practicing their various cultures in whichever way they can, cultures became merged. And of course, they eventually evolved into some things. The Europeans also came here in the Caribbean with their own practices as well. But what's crucial to note is that the slave masters banned a number of the practices of the enslaved because you know what? They didn't understand it. So they were afraid of what it is that they did not understand. And so because they did not understand what the slaves were doing, they banned some of those things. But the slaves were very smart. What the enslaved did, when they would get their free time, they would start doing some of those practices just the same. But what they did, they started mimicking some of the European practices. And when they were mimicking those European practices, they put some of their Africanness into whatever it is that existed. And so because they were mimicking some of the African and the European practices, the slave masters thought some of these things were very harmless, and then they were allowed, because it somewhat resembled their European practices, and so the slaves were allowed to continue the practicing. And so as a result, what we have been left with became practices that had European influence and African influence. But we are also not going to forget the indentured laborers who came to the Caribbean. Because the indentured laborers came to the Caribbean, they also carried with them their own practices. And because they carried with them their own practices, some of those practices, coupled with the African practices and the European practices, gave us all the various things that we now have within the Caribbean. So if you examine some of these particular cultural forms, you can look carefully, you'll see the European element, and you will also look at it and you will see the African element. And if you look closely, you'll also see some of the indentured labor workers. So it's the Chinese and the Indians. You'll see some of them, some of the practices. As a matter of fact, some of the practices are full on, yes, indentured. So for example, wherever in the Caribbean you have strong Indian culture, you'll always find that there might be a Jose festival someplace. Yes, that is practiced in Trinidad, I think it's in Guyana, and there are some parts in Jamaica, in Clarendon, where you have strong Indian population, where they also practice their own Jose festival as well. So I do trust and hope that you understand what we mean by retention. We meaning what it is that was left, or what is left with us when all the faces of the people came to the Caribbean. That is why I say out of Jamaica motto is out of what is the motto? Out of many one people, because we had all these different people who would have passed through the Caribbean and through Jamaica, and it is this melting pot that was created, and a mix up and blend up of everybody that has created the culture that we currently have. So let us now answer this question. I see how much you were listening and paying attention to what was being said. So here's the question. Which two reasons, yeah? Name 2 reasons why we should learn the cultural forms. Why is it important? A, they make us good people. B, we can celebrate our music. C, preservation of identity. And D, they help us to understand the people around us. I want you to put your response in the comment section. Yes, you can just put A and B, or B and C, however you want to put it, or you can write out the response if you want. But just put it in the comment section. Let me see if you were listening and what your response would be. This has brought us to the end of the video. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for participating. Until you hear from me again in another video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel.